While in Charleston, Janet and I went on 3 walking tours. 2 are covered in this video. The third will be covered in the next video. The Nathaniel Russell House was built in 1808 for Nathaniel Russell, a wealthy merchant and trader of enslaved people. It is recognized as one of the most important neoclassical houses in the United States. It was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1960 and was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1973.
The enslaved, while they're working in here, are breathing in soot. What they found when they went through every coat of plaster on these walls was a coat of whitewash, a coat of soot, whitewashed soot over and over again. You will have a housekeeping staff, a cooking staff, keeping in mind the cook here in this house, this enslaved cook, has to prepare the finest dishes being served in Charleston. They're going to be dining in the same way they would in a fine townhome in London. They're actually emulating the lives of the British aristocracy. We know that the enslaved people and their diets had vegetables, fruits, and herbs from the kitchen gardens directly beyond here. They also had some kind of grain every day. They also had meat in their diets, but not nearly the amount or the fine cuts as the Russells would have had. All of the furnishings date between 1770 and 1820. The artwork also dates between those same years. 1820 is the year that Nathaniel Russell passed away. He doesn't build this house until later in his life. He comes here when he's 27, and the year is 1765. We're still a colony of Great Britain. He comes here with ships. He's the son of a merchant family up in Rhode Island, and in that time, Rhode Island was the capital of the slave trade here in the colonies. He comes here, sets himself up in business. He loves Charleston. He stays here the rest of his life. He imports luxuries from all across the globe, as far away as China. He has one of the only ships in Charleston that goes over to China. He also exports rice, indigo, tobacco, and cotton, and then, of course, participating in that Atlantic slave trade, both before and after the American Revolution. So this is the space that he uses for his home office. You're seated here if you're on business, but not invited guests. They spend no time in this space. They go through the double doors to the interior of the home. They make that social statement. Once you pass through there, you're in the inner circle of the Russell family. But if you come on business, you're going to see Nathaniel Russell over here in his office. That's why you don't see a lot of detail in this room. It's a yellowish color, and every surface throughout the home has been extensively researched. They have gone up to and over 20 coats of paint to determine original finishes and completely restore them. We know the woodwork has always been painted white, with the exception of the doors. The doors have a finish that we call it faux painting. They called it graining. The staircase itself is called free-flowing or free-floating because it just seems to float all the way to the 3rd floor with no support or attachment except the landings. It's built on the cantilever principle, so each step is supported by the step below it. The weight increases up to the landing and begins again to the 3rd floor. They dressed for dinner. It was formal. They had at least 3 courses. Even if it's just Sarah and Nathaniel sitting down together, they're going to have a 3-course meal. The 3rd course will be completely devoted to dessert. If they're having guests, they're going to have many more courses. The meal will become the entertainment. And you can see how easy it would be to add additional leaves into this table to make and accommodate more guests and accommodate more close settings, or remove them and have that smaller, more intimate setting if it's just the 2 of them dining together. But it's set up now as though they were dining with their 2 daughters and sons-in-laws. This is a Charleston-made table and sideboard. This sideboard and table, Charleston 1800 mahogany. The chairs are from New York in the Sheraton style. The china you see here is sacred bird and butterfly pattern. It is Chinese export. Remembering Sarah has access to all of these things as much as she wants because her husband has ships that go to China. The silver is mainly imported from England. The centerpiece would hold a portion of the dessert. It was filled with fruit, nuts, and candy. At the end of the meal, we had an edible centerpiece. They loved this space. It was their equivalent of our family rooms. They came in here, the girls worked on their drawing, their needlework, they worked on their music in here. Sarah used it as a home office. She worked at the desk. She met with the enslaved butler and the enslaved cook. They had to plan menus, both daily and for entertaining. The enslaved butler had to know everything that was happening in the household. Each room had to be set up for that every single day. They didn't even keep the dining room table in the center of the room. They set it up every day for how many people would be dining there. Look up to the ceiling. The ceilings have gotten 2 feet higher on this floor, where all of the formal entertaining takes place. The cornices are molded, 22-karat gold leaf on the trim. You have the balconies along the entire front and side of the property, perfectly positioned to catch the breezes off the harbor. This is the harbor side of the house. They are accessed by opening the windows and walking out underneath. That's how you access all of the balconies. And if you look out this window, you will see we have the only monogrammed home in Charleston. Nathaniel Russell had his initials set into the ironwork, and now they've been there for over 200 years. In this room, you see Sarah entertaining her friends. She's using this room regularly. She will have Bible studies in here. She will have teas served in here. She will meet here with her charitable organizations. Her sister, her daughter, and herself found the Ladies Benevolent Society. They serve the enslaved and free Africans in Charleston, providing medical care. Today they provide medicines for people who cannot afford them. They're still doing good works, they're still functioning, and they still meet here once a year. They've been meeting in this house now for over 200 years. And so you can imagine it set up as though they were meeting in here today. The tea set, the tea table, the urn stand, and enslaved men would be carrying a tray, holding a tray of finger foods, serving finger foods, and Mrs. Russell will pour the tea. And you get this finish. This is a distemper paint finish. It goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. They used it all the way up to our more modern painting techniques. Standard size bed, the bird and thistle pattern you see here on the bed, the small chair, and on the necessary chair. This necessary chair is a commode chair. They did not use the privies that were to the rear of the property. Those were for the enslaved. They used chamber pots are these necessary chairs, and it's kind of unusual to see an upholstered one.
We really appreciated the perspective of the McLeod Plantation tour. It was given from the perspective of the enslaved people, not the plantation owner. The property includes the Georgian-style plantation house, built in 1858, along with a carriage house, a dairy building, a gin house, a barn, and 6 remaining clapboard cabins for enslaved people.
If you all didn't know already, and you may not, it's really fine, McLeod Plantation at the historic site is part of the International Sites of Conscience. Essentially what that means is that our primary focus here is not on the enslavers, the McLeods, but it is on the 74 to 100 enslaved people and their descendants that lived, worked, were born, and died here, and those lived experiences. I will mention the McLeods as it is pertinent, but it will be in no way, shape, or form the primary focus of the tour. In terms of structures, we've got the enslaved quarters further down. We will get to those, and then the structures you can more easily see. The structure underneath the tree there is an old dairy and storage building. The structure immediately behind that is an old kitchen and laundry building. One side's kitchen, the other side is laundry. The reason why it has an M-shaped chimney stack is because it's 2 different flues that are sharing one chimney. We got that green building over there, which we'll get to in a bit. But first, we got to talk about all of that. That is actually the back of the house. And when this was utilized as a plantation, it never, ever, ever, ever looked like that. It looked like every other back of the house you've ever seen or have yourself. All it was a door and a small landing. However, about 100 years ago, all of this landscape was changed. So, with the exception of the enslaved quarters, the dairy and storage, the kitchen and laundry, and the green building over there, everything else that you can see here is a myth. All of these trees, and they go all the way down to the Wapu Creek behind us, are only about 100 years old. planted here in the 19-teens and 1920s at the same time that a massive trench was dug, so you have a waterside view from all of that. The porch is added, the columns are added, and the balcony is added to make all this look far grander than it ever actually was. Now, major reasoning for that is that the McLeods, like many other plantation owners throughout the Southeast after World War I, want to capitalize on plantation tourism. There's lots of people coming to the South from around the country and around the world at that time, and they have a very, very narrow and inaccurate view of what the South is. Propagated on one hand by what was called the Lost Cause narrative, basically the idea that the Civil War was not about enslavement, it was about states' rights, that we treated the enslaved like people, that it was a war of northern aggression, all that Moonlight and Magnolia nonsense, as well as major pieces of media of the day, mainly The Original Birth of a Nation, which is 100% a KKK propaganda film, as well as the various iterations of Gone with the Wind. So lots of people are coming here from around the country and around the world, and they are assuming that this is what they're going to see, and so the McLeods are more than happy to capitalize on that ignorance. This has been a plantation of various sizes, going all the way back to the late 1600s. However, by the time the first of the McLeods arrives here in the early 1850s, it is at its largest physically. So it's 1,700 acres of land. So it stretches 2 miles that way, 2 miles that way, and about 1.5 miles that way. The first of the McLeods, William Wallace McLeod Sr., wants to acquire this plantation because he wants to become wealthy. He wants to rival the rice-growing plantation owners who are further up the Ashen and the Cooper Rivers, but more than anything, he wants a piece of downtown. Because rural plantations are where you make your money, urban plantations are where you show off your money. Mm-hmm. So any of the grand homes you may have seen or toured or staying in downtown are representations of urban plantations. They've got the same thing as rural plantations, just in a much, much smaller package. McLeod himself never gets wealthy, he barely gets rich, he also doesn't come from a lot of money. So he's got to make his money the old-fashioned way. He's got to marry into it. He marries into a plantation family called the Lawtons, and through his marriage to a Susan Lawton and the dowry that comes along with that, he's able to acquire this plantation. He gets it on the cheap. He gets it on the super cheap. Because the previous owner had run into a significant amount of financial debt, and after selling his roughly 100 enslaved, still owes money. So McLeod is able to acquire the 1,700 acres here, a different big house than this one, various ancillary buildings, and space for at least 100 enslaved people here for $11,500 in 1850s money. In today's money, that's about $500,000. You could not buy a quarter of a house downtown for $500,000. So McLeod, along with getting a wedding gift of 25 enslaved people from his new father-in-law, is absolutely ready to go. His way of attempting to become wealthy is to utilize enslaved labor to grow for him a very, very valuable cash crop called Sea Island cotton. Of the 1,700 acres here, 400 of those acres are just utilized for Sea Island cotton cultivation. There's about 200 acres to the east of us. It's all marshland, so while you can't grow anything there, it's valuable in other ways, predominantly for fertilizers. There's about 100 acres of timberland to the southwest of us. It's shared between a couple of other plantations. And the area where we are in now was utilized either for livestock or for feed crops. In 1860, we know that there's at least 50 head of cow that are here. They've got to be milked twice a day, so the McLeods are exporting anywhere from 200 to 500 pounds of butter every single year. There's about 70 head of hog that are here, so they've got to be processed, as well as we've got sheep here, so there's wool products, and then draft animals such as horses and oxen. In terms of feed crops, we know that some of the enslaved are being utilized to grow peas, beans, corn, hay, and sweet potatoes. So what I'd like to remind everyone is, one, it would not have ever been this quiet here, and two, it would have smelled very, very, very differently. You have enslaved people who are being issued a specific ration, and that ration was a single pound of salted meat and 3/4 pounds of cornmeal per person per week. Yes. I could do that. One meal. I know. I mean, you burn through it, and particularly with working heavily in whatever kind of feed crop you're doing, you burn through that in 4 hours. Right. And so, while they are allowed to have supplemental gardens, hunt fish, things like that, if they have the energy, they don't really have the energy. They're almost always one meal away from starvation. This structure here is what the McLeods called the gin house, the cotton processing kind, not the drinking kind. It's not originally green, it's not originally have this tin siding on the side. it essentially looked a whole lot closer to that old horse and livestock farm. Now, it was built by the enslaved all of the ways, and it bears their mark in a whole lot of other ways as well. Now, it was utilized to process that very, very valuable Sea Island cotton. However, when we think about cotton today, we're probably not thinking about Sea Island cotton. We're probably thinking about what is called upland cotton. Upland cotton gets to be about waist to chest high, and it's what's called short staple cotton. So think about it like a rough cotton ball, because that's functionally what it is. However, Sea Island cotton is fundamentally different in that when it grows, is that it gets to be about 6 to 8 feet tall, and it's what's called long staple cotton. So each fiber of that's going to be about 2 to 2.5 inches in length. And so what that allows for is for a much, much finer garment to be created. Upland cotton at the time is going to create garments that's going to feel a whole lot more like denim or burlap, whereas Sea Island cotton, even right off the plant, feels a whole lot more like silk. Because it is so fine, though, it has to be ginned in a different way. For upland cotton, you can gin it utilizing an Eli Whitney-style comb gin. Basically, you have the rollers, they've got little tines on them, and the way they get all the sticks and twigs and seeds and things is to comb through it. However, you do that with Sea Island cotton, you will break the fibers, rendering it worthless, so that's not going to work. And so what the enslavers have to do is pull enslaved populations from Western Africa that can recreate a type of gin called a roller gin. In its absolutely simplest form, think about it like 2 different rolling pins that are squeezing out all the sticks and twigs and seeds and things, and then after anything that doesn't come out after a few passes is going to be taken out by hand. The gin that you saw in the Welcome Center is a modernized version of that roller gin. Now, we know that McLeod Sr. is paying taxes on 64 bags of Sea Island cotton that are processed through here in 1860. Each bag is roughly 8 feet tall and weighs 400 pounds. Processed from here, brought to the Wappa Creek, where they put it onto a boat. That boat will take it to the peninsula, where they put it onto a larger boat, and then that boat will take it to mills either in the northeast United States or abroad in places like England and France, where it's processed further. They're doing all of the jobs everywhere, and they're literally walking, talking, breathing money. They are your dowry, they are your line of credit, they are your insurance policy, and everything in between. They're also worth more than everything else you own. Just on this plantation, this is the 5th or 6th largest plantation out of 25 total plantations here on James Island. 63% of the total wealth of this plantation is just in enslaved people. That's more than all the land, all the livestock, all the cash crops, and all the structures combined. On other plantations, both here on the island as well as further afield, that number is over 90%. While we do not know the name of the person who made this brick, we likely never will. Given the size of the prints, they were between the ages of 6 and 10 when they made this brick. There's also these two, which is more indicative of a slightly older person. You go down another 1.5 miles, that's the southern end of the McLeod Plantation. Immediately to the south of that is another plantation. Immediately south of that is another plantation, going almost all the way down to Folly Beach. And there are other plantations to the immediate west of us as well. So if you're an enslaved person here, you don't necessarily know where one plantation ends and the next one begins. Other than that, the enslaved had to deal with what were called slave patrols. Precursors of modern police forces in all of the ways that are made up of the master and his sons and then any poor whites that are expected to arm themselves and ride their beat from plantation to plantation looking for any runaways. Other than that, the enslaved had to deal with those more well-known forms of violence. From physical violence, whippings, beatings, and the like, to emotional violence. We can sell your kids, we can kill your kids, as well as psychosexual violence, something we absolutely know occurred here as well. Because up in that attic space, along with the youngest of the enslaved that we know was brought here, was an enslaved girl by the name of Isabel. Isabel was given to the McLeods by the prominent Pinckney family to be a nanny and wet nurse for their children when she was in her mid to late teens. Isabel was my skin tone. How does that happen?
The owner.
Yeah. So forced sexual assault or rape of Isabel's enslaved mother by her mother's master producing her. While Isabel is here, she has a child. His name was Daniel. Daniel was lighter than me. Same process again. And so while Daniel was in the house, while he is serving the McLeods their meals, he is very likely serving his own father. Because there were very few trees over there, where the enslaved cabins are today, and there were 23 cabins, they have, anyone looking from the house has an almost unbroken view of what any of the enslaved are doing in and around their cabins at all times. So as an enslaved person here, you have to deal with all those other forms of violence, but you're also dealing with an almost complete and total lack of privacy. So there's that as well. Now, we've got to talk about the youngest of the enslaved that we know was brought here. Her name when she arrives here was Leah. She was not born here. She was born about 50 miles to the north of us, and when she is between the ages of 4 and 7 years old, she is forcibly marched, along with her mother and father and other enslaved, the 50-mile distance from her birthplace to the Charleston Peninsula over the span of a day and a half to 2 days. She is sold downtown at a location called Ryan's Mart. Ryan's Mart is where the old slave mart museum is today. She was sold away from her mother and father. They were sold to a separate plantation, and Leah was acquired by William Wallace McLeod Sr. to be a plaything for his children. He was brought here alone via a boat because we were on an island, brought up a central pathway, and the first place that she would have been deposited is within that kitchen and laundry building, where there were other enslaved women and girls who now have the added task of caring for and consoling a very upset young girl. Something that made her transition here even the smallest bit easier is that Leah herself and any of her family and any of the enslaved within the area would have been what were called Gullah Geechee people. They've heard the term before. The incredible short answer of that is after a significant revolt called the Stono Rebellion that happened 12 miles to the south of us in 1739. That very much changed the way that enslavement was utilized, both in terms of what it was able to do, but then also what the colonial response was, which the colonial response was to both send out militias, but then also to create a situation, or to pass the 1740 Negro Code. Negro Code enshrines in the law things we think about enslavement to this day. Everything both domestically and then also internationally. Everything from the fact that the enslaved had to carry around badges and papers for identification purposes, that they could no longer meet in groups of greater than 2 without a white guardian, that they had to had limits on what they could wear. But then the biggest aspect of that is that it now made it officially illegal to teach an enslaved person to read and write. It is a law that endured on the books from 1740 until the Freedmen's Bureau in 1865. All those trees are only about 100 years old, except for that one. That is our witness tree. It is a live oak like many of the others. It's at least 300 years old. It was here before the house was here. It was here before the McLeods were here. It saw Leah, Daniel, and Isabel here. It saw the entirety of the Civil War here, as well as the freedmen and their descendants living in these cabins well after emancipation. These are our remaining cabins. They look a whole lot nicer now than they did when they were initially constructed. They're relatively freshly painted. The roofs don't leak. There's no massive spaces in between the boards, things like that. However, there are definitely some things that have endured from the era of enslavement to now. They're all only about 300 square feet in size, and during the era of enslavement as well as afterwards, could have housed anywhere from 8 to 14 individuals at a time. So you may have a part of your house, your apartment, your flat that's about 300 square feet. Now add into there's 7 to 10 other people that also live there, and things get very, very crowded very, very quickly. A couple of things about some of the cabins: they also did not originally have plumbing, electrical, or running water. That's going to be important. Now, the first cabin that we pass on the end is the cabin of a gentleman by the name of John Gathers. His name is John. He takes the name of Gathers after the war. He's a third-generation carpenter here. His grandfather, the enslaved man called Gable, helped to build both the gin house and the main house. John, while he's here, he also has some kids, some of whom live to adulthood. John Gathers' oldest living descendant from here is named Bishop Gathers. Bishop is in his mid-70s today, and up until 3 years ago, he had not set foot on this plantation since he was 5 years old. He was born in cabin number 6. Now, just behind this cabin is a small patch of flowers and a placard in the woods. That is the burial site of one of John Gathers' daughters who did not live to adulthood. Her name was Julia May Gathers, and she lived all of 26 days. We did not know that that was where she was buried until Bishop showed it to us one day. Now, this cabin is the cabin of one of John Gathers' daughters who did live to adulthood. Her name was Robertsina Gathers, and she was born in that cabin in the late 1940s. So she comes up through KKK 1 and 2, as well as black codes, Jim Crow segregation, and the Civil Rights era in the 1950s and 1960s. She's able to attend the Freedmen's Bureau School, because it's 2 miles from here and she can walk there, until she's 12 years old. At 12 years old, though, she hits a very significant roadblock. That roadblock being segregation. Because during the era of segregation, there is no busing of any non-white children. So unless you could walk to school, you're just not going to get it. And the dominant idea was, why would we bother to educate you beyond the age of 12? You're just going to end up in the fields like your parents anyway. However, Robertsina is in luck. She has family who live down on the peninsula, and so she's able to move from here and go stay with them and attend segregated high school. When Robertina leaves here, she tells family and community alike that she's never, ever, ever coming back. And so she does well in school, and she becomes a nurse. Unfortunately for her, though, she is dragged back here in the 1970s. Because in the 1970s, Willie McLeod, the last of the McLeods, is old. He has no living relatives. All his sisters are long dead. He never marries. He has no children, and he's basically living up at the house by himself. However, he is in need of medical care. So he does. He looks through the nursing logs until he finds a name he recognizes. Robertina gathers, and he asks for her specifically. Now, she's not totally aware of where she's going to end up. All her boss really tells her is there's a long-term case on James Island. So she's understandably upset. When she arrives here and begins to walk up this pathway to meet Willie McLeod for the first time in her life. She's even more upset to see the conditions the members of her community are still living in these cabins in the 1970s. This well is their only source of water. The well pump breaks a lot. When it breaks, they can't go up to Mr. Willie and ask him for water. He will not give it to them. They've got to go across the street to a bank and beg for water. They also don't get their first outhouse here until 1967. It's still in the woods on the other side of Robertina's cabin to this day. Isabel of John gathers, of Bishop gathers, of Julia May gathers, and of Robertina gathers, because, more than anything, they are the reason why we are here. So, if you all don't have any other questions, take a look inside the cabins as you can. Take a look on the first level of the house. There's also informative panels, reading lists, things like that. And with that, thank you all so much for coming. My name is Ista. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
I'll put links to the other videos in this series in the description of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please give it a like if you did, and consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, thanks for watching.